Okay, Chazaku Baruch Rabotai. I'm glad to be here. So, the topic for today that I wanted to share with you, some Divrei Torah, is we're living in a very interesting generation where it's called a transitional generation that for close to 500 years, generation after generation, after the expulsion in Girush Sfarad, there was a masoret, there was a tradition of psak, there was a tradition of how to follow halacha in the Sephardic countries and particularly in Morocco. And in the past generation or two, people moved from country to country, so they lost direction, and there's all types of opinions that a person gets barraged with, and they lose focus on what really they're supposed to follow. And then a person comes and tells them, you know what your father was doing was wrong. He doesn't know what to say. This person looks much more religious than him. And so on and so forth, it evolves that there's a lot of confusion. So Baruch Hashem, you have a Hashuv Rav, Rabbi Elmaleh, Hashem Yishmeru V'chayeu. You have all the questions of halacha you could ask to him. I can make as much trouble as I want to just take the airplane back to LA. But what I want to present over here is the background and the history of what Moroccan halacha is based on. Not very interested in talking about cultural things that you could look in other places for. I'm speaking strictly from a halachic perspective, a perspective that is very possible obligates people to follow a certain path. There's a halacha called Al Titosh Torah Timecha, that you're not supposed to deviate from your traditions, and then we could speak about different particular minhagim if people have questions. So let's start with the following: how is halacha based? How what's the evolution of halacha? I'm going to give a very brief overview on how halacha developed from the time of the Gemara. The Rishonim came, the different medieval commentators, up until the year 1450, a little later than that. That was the era of the Rishonim. There was the Rif, the Rambam, the Rashi, Tosfot, and they all recorded what they felt the halacha was. Now, the Shulchan Aruch at the end, the Bet Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, at the end of that era, saw that there was a lot of different opinions, and nobody's going to really know how to follow. So he picked three opinions: the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh. It's called Tere Migotelat, 2 out of 3. And whoever those 2 out of the 3 follow, that's what the halacha is like. And that halacha became accepted among the Sfaradim. We'll see what the word Sfaradim means. Well, it's also a confusion today what it means, but this was the basis and the bedrock of halacha. Now, we are commonly those who dabble in halacha understand that the Bet Yosef took the Rambam and Rif, because the Rif was from Spain and Morocco. Rambam was from Spain and Morocco as well, and Egypt, and they were Sfaradim, and the Rif was Ashkenazi, so you have to even things out a little bit. Of course, you have the Rosh, was Ashkenazi, so you have to even things out a little bit. Can't give them totally control, but you give 33%, and that's going to be okay. But that doesn't make any sense. Either everything's Sfaradi or the truth is that the opposite is correct. The Rosh was much more the Rav of the Sfaradim than the Rif and the Rambam. So what happened was that the Maharami Rothenburg was the Rav of the Rosh in Germany, and they put him in prison. And the Rosh knew that his turn was coming up, that they were going to imprison him and were going to lock him up. So he escaped to Spain. First he got to the north of Spain in an area called Catalonia, and there he met the Rashba, one of the great Rishonim. The Rashba and him learned for a week. The Rashba told him they need you in Castilla. Castilla was more in the south of Spain, and that's where he was located. That's where he became the Rav in Castilla. And there the Rosh had a tremendous influence on Psak Halacha by the Sfaradim, to a point that the Abarbanel writes, Harosh hu Rabam shel Sfaradim. Rav David ben Yechia was also one of the Rishonim, writes, Horato nishpata bechol malchutahi. Rav Yitzchak Israeli, who was a Talmid of the Rosh, writes, Heir Hashem et Ruach Harav Agadol Rabbeinu Asher Bar Yechiel Latzet Meretz Ashkenaz Beretz Mulato Ubau Banav Bnei Beto Betulitula, which is Toledo. Hence the name Rabbi. We have the Rabbi Toledano over here. That's the name of Tulitula. Liha'ir et enenu leotzienu mechoshech hasichlut ve'aptiyot le'ora chochma ve'tvuna. He was very, very recognized as the prime halachic authority in Sfarad. As a matter of fact, when we talk about Psak Halacha of Sfaradim, it's basically the Rosh and his students in Castilla. Who else was in Castilla at the time? The Ran, Rabbeinu Nisim, the Magid Mishneh, the son of the Rosh, of course, which is the Tur, who brings many times in the Tur Minhag Sfarad, which is, you'll see, this is a lot of times the Moroccan, the Turkish, and others follow Minhag Sfarad, which is not like Edot HaMizrach, a lot that didn't go with this, because Minhag Sfarad comes particularly from Castilla. Whereas, if you notice, the Bet Yosef doesn't follow the Rashba and the Ramban, although they were Sfaradim as well, but they're from Catalonia. As a matter of fact, the Ramban writes in one place in the Sefer Milchamot Hashem, he writes, Sifrei Sfaradim ne'emanim alenu yoter. The Sfarim of the Sfaradim are known. So he considered himself more from Catalonia. Sfaradim was the Rosh, as I mentioned, the Ran, the Abu Draham. Abu Draham as well was one of the poskim, came from Castilla. So this was the background of the halacha that was going on then. The Rambam was also very accepted in the Sephardic countries. There's one sefer from Rav Yedidia Monsonega called Minchat Zikaron Klalim Aleph, who writes in the name, who writes that the Rambam was accepted in Morocco, and Harav Rahman, the great Rabbi Naim from Gibraltar, in Seilotu Tshuvot Rachamim Peshutim Choshen Mishpot Ilchot Savot Siman Aleph, he says, at the beginning they accepted the Rambam. What it means is that the Rambam definitely had a heavy weight at the beginning, but evolved more, especially in Castilla, halachot like the Rosh. Okay, that's 1492. There was the great expulsion, Shnat Mizre, it was called, by the Jews, the time where all the Jews were expelled from Spain. Some of them Turkey, some of them went to Algeria. Most of them, it's safe to say many of them, probably most of them, went to Morocco. 50,000 of them, according to the historians, went to Morocco. In the first couple of years, 30,000 of them already passed away in a plague. And in Fez, they came mostly to the capital there, what the time was Fez. And that's when the evolution of halacha really started taking shape, really started forming into what we see today. What happened was that around this time, the Bet Yosef, who also visited Morocco, according to tradition, a few times, and he had the tradition of his Rav, the Maharibe Rav, that was his Rav, who had this ruling that he gave over to him: you go out of the two out of the three, the Rif Rambam and the Rosh. Maharibe Rav was from Morocco, was from Fez. It's very probable that this klal was already deep rooted in Morocco, going after these two out of the three poskim. So when the Bet Yosef wrote his sefer based on this ruling, so it was already quite accepted. So what happened was, and nobody knows exactly how to pinpoint at what point it exactly took place, but the Sfaradim, and I can't say mainly, but particularly in Morocco, were of the pioneers by the Torah Jewry to accept the opinion of Maran HaShulchan Aruch. I get very frustrated when I hear from people that they say, oh, did Moroccans also follow Maran? And I look at them with wonder, and I tell them, they are the ones who were the originators of this shita. It could be in Turkey as well. Some of the great Chachamim at that time in Eretz Yisrael, there was also some who also promoted this. But if you take a look at the writings of Rav Ovadia Yosef, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, he brings as sources that we accepted Maran from the great Moroccan Chachamim as his primary sources. The Mishpat Tzedakah B'Yakov, Rabbi Yaakov ibn Sur in Chelik Bet, Siman Hey, Kol Asher. The Mishpat Tzedakah B'Yakov is a famous saying. He says, before the acceptance of Shulchan Aruch, we went wherever the Rosh tells us to go, wherever our head tells us, and it was a play on the words to say we follow the Rosh. But once Maran came along, we accepted Maran afilu ke'elef poskim. And slowly but surely, more Rabbanim in their psakim in the 1700s, and for sure in the 1800s and the 1900s, but even before the 1700s, there's one Rav called Rabbi Shmuel ibn Dinan. He's apparently the first one that gave, this is according to tradition, there are those who question it, who gave smicha to Maran, and he also was in the 1500s we're talking about, and he was one of the originators also that we follow Maran HaShulchan Aruch, and slowly but surely this became accepted, and it became a known fact that the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, of Maran HaShulchan Aruch, was the authoritative one. So when we speak about Sfaradim, it's mainly in Morocco, in Turkey as well, in little bit in Algeria and Tunisia as well. In Syria, there was a few Migurashim who got to Syria, few Migurashim got to other places, but when you talk about Iraq, Iran, and a little bit, that's called Edot HaMizrach. So you say there's Edot HaMizrach and the Sfaradim. You don't see the Sidurim say LeEdot HaMizrach ve'Sfaradim. And in truth, they're Rachok MiMizrach LeMa'arav. Very different. Ma'arav is Morocco, it's called Ma'arav HaPnimi, the Chida calls it. And the Iraqis and Iranians didn't really have a tradition of Maran until much later. There was a dearth of Torah, the persecutions, whatever else, and until Rav Abdallah Somech was taught from Tzadka Chutzin, who came from Syria, and there the Torah started growing much more until eventually the Ben Ish Chai, which is quite recent. And if you look at so people tell me, is our opinion much different than the opinion of Rav Ovadia Yosef and others? So I answer them, as a matter of fact, the philosophy, the shita of Rav Ovadia Yosef to endorse and promote Maran is a great reinforcement and favor to Moroccan Jewry, because he is bringing back what we were the pioneers in, and there are some difference of opinions on customs that we'll go through now, but basically the bedrock of halacha is much Rav Ovadia Yosef's opinion is much closer to Moroccan psak than, for example, Kaf HaChaim or those who follow the rulings of the Rashash. Much more, that's much closer to Moroccan psak. It's important to know, people get confused with this, not to get caught up in the noise. Try to really understand what the facts are on the ground and to learn. That's in a respectful manner. You could say whatever, all your different opinions, as long as everybody is respectful towards each other and understands, and understanding that every halacha comes from a source and every minhag comes from a source. So what I tell people is the following: if you want to know the source of Moroccan halacha, how we're posek, you open up a Shulchan Aruch or a Mishnah Berura. So a lot of different opinions. How do we know what to follow? So I wrote together with a dear friend of mine. His name is Rabbi Yosef Peretz from Panama. We wrote together a short booklet, and it's printed in my new Sefer on Choshen Mishpat Magen Avot. It's printed at the beginning over there, about 20 or something different rules how the Moroccans are posek. I'm not going to go through all 20. I'm going to give you 4 or 5 of basic rules. Those of you who are involved more in the learning of halacha will understand it a little bit more, and others who are not yet involved in halacha, Rabbi Al-Maleh is willing to teach you day and night. He has time. I'll give you a cell phone number afterwards. You just have to bother him to, and he's all hours of the night, and he will. That's what he's here for, right, Rabbi? Kol hakavod. Thank you. So what we have over here is the following. Number 1 is that the Sfaradim, and when I say Sfaradim, I mean the Moroccans, particularly accepted upon ourselves the rulings of Maran Shulchan Aruch. Simple enough, right? Now, what does the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch mean? The Shulchan Aruch had a lot of Sfarim. He had the Bet Yosef, which is the background. He had the actual Shulchan Aruch. Then he had the Bedek HaBayit, which is the glosses and the corrections on the Shulchan Aruch. After the Bedek HaBayit, he had the Kesef Mishneh, his commentary on the Rambam. He had the Avkat Rochel, which is responsa. This is very confusing. This is probably the biggest difference between those who follow Moroccan halacha and the halacha based on Edut HaMizrach or Rav Ovadia Yosef, is that Rav Ovadia Yosef was of the opinion that when we accepted Maran Shulchan Aruch, we accepted a whole package deal, everything that he wrote, which makes a lot of sense. But he brings sources that follow this. In Morocco, the accepted opinion, and you'll see why, was that we accepted only what's written in the Bet Yosef and in the Shulchan Aruch, not what he wrote in his Teshuvot if they contradict. There's one place in the Sefer Vayomer Yitzchak ben Walid where he has a contradiction. In one place he writes, we follow in the Bet Yosef. Another place he writes, we follow everything. And it could be the reason why in the other place they follow everything is because he was saying when it doesn't contradict what's written in Bet Yosef, but when there's a contradiction, we only follow the Bet Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch. So if that's the case, the reason it seems to be that we followed only Bet Yosef and Shulchan Aruch, and what I'm telling you is not one opinion. This is written in thousands of recorded Piskei Dinim from the Moroccan Batei Dinim throughout the generations, that it was known to them. They accepted only what's written in Bet Yosef, Shulchan Aruch, and they didn't follow tangential opinions that it could have been written here or there. They wanted to give a simple, clear way how to be posek halacha, which leads us to the second rule. You weren't allowed to say kimli kedat neged dat maran shulchan aruch. Kimli means that if you're involved in a monetary dispute with someone and he has another opinion against the Shulchan Aruch, so he can't say, well, I have the money by me, so you want to extract money from me? So who says I have an opinion like me? Well, if the Shulchan Aruch says not like you, he's too authoritative that you can't do that. When there's two opinions that are not Shulchan Aruch and you have money by you, so if you're saying kimli, so you could keep the money in your jurisdiction. But when there's Shulchan Aruch involved, they were so authoritative you couldn't even say that. The third rule is that we don't say that if Maran Shulchan Aruch would have seen something, he would have went back. And this is not written by all the Moroccan Chachamim, but some of them, and it seems to make a lot of sense, because once again, if you do that, halacha never has an end. You say, oh, he could have seen this, then he could have seen something else that would have made him retract in the first place. En davar sof. When Chachamim gave us these rulings to follow the Bet Yosef and Shulchan Aruch, it was in order to give us a clear path how to follow, not to confuse us. So what's more confusing than saying, this is the halacha, and then 5 years later somebody's going to say, but you know, I found a source that if he would have seen this, he would have went back. Very hard to say that. So Chachamim, we don't follow saying, Ilu haya ro'eh would have said that. The fourth rule is that where the Bet Yosef and Shulchan Aruch don't express an opinion, we follow the Ramah. This is where some say, oh, Moroccans follow the Ramah. So they don't really know what they're saying. They understand it to say against the Shulchan Aruch, but the opposite is true. Follow the Shulchan Aruch very strong. But where the Shulchan Aruch didn't express an opinion, the Ramah is stronger than most poskim. By the Ashkenazim, it's not that way. It's an all-out war. Magen Avram against the Taz, against the Ramah. Sometimes they'll be posek against the Ramah. So we follow the Ramah in a way more than the Ashkenazim. And it's not. Somebody recently sent me a whole ma'amar that he wrote on this, and he brought a lot of sources that it wasn't only in Morocco. It was in Syria as well. It was in Tunisia. It was in many other Sephardic countries. That if the Shulchan Aruch doesn't express an opinion, the Ramah is the heavyweight. The Ramah is the heavyweight. What happens if the Ramah says something and the Shulchan Aruch doesn't, but in Bet Yosef he says something? It doesn't. Nobody really writes clear on this. My opinion and the opinion of my friend Rabbi Peretz is that we probably would follow the Bet Yosef. Probably follow the Bet Yosef. If it's not explicit in the Bet Yosef, then it's a little bit of a fight. But really we follow the Bet Yosef much more. But when the Bet Yosef doesn't express his opinion, we'll follow the Ramah. Fifth opinion, the fifth rule, and this is a very important rule, is that this is where there's a big difference between the common halacha from Edut HaMizrach, that's commonly known, and even some Sephardic halacha nowadays, as opposed to the original Moroccan psak, is that we do not commonly say Safek brachot le'akel against the Shulchan Aruch. Safek brachot le'akel means that when you have a doubt whether to make a beracha or not to make a beracha, when you don't know whether to make a blessing on something, so since the name of Hashem is such an important reverence you have to have for it, so when you have a safek, when you have a doubt, and you don't know whether to say it, you say safek brachot lakel. And even if the Shulchan Aruch says to say this bracha, we say sabal, safek brachot lakel. And true, this klal is very difficult to understand because we follow the Shulchan Aruch in Hilchot Shabbat, where the death penalty is evoked as a punishment, or anything to do with marriage, that the child could be a mamzer. We follow Shulchan Aruch. Well, not always, actually. There's erva. I don't want to get into that. There's in Hilchot Nida, which is karet, we follow Maran the Shulchan Aruch, but all of a sudden by Hilchot Barachot, we forget about it. Hilchot Shabbat, we follow Maran, which is a deoraita as well, and it's Isur Karet, and we're not going to follow Maran by Brachot. So there were many Sephardic opinions that say we don't say Safek Brachot Lakel against the Shulchan Aruch. And it seems to be this was the original Moroccan psak. I'll tell you a few quick proofs to this because this is something new that people don't know, but it's something important to recognize. In the Siman Chet, Shulchan Aruch in Ilchot Tzitzit writes that if a person has his talit and he takes off his talit to go to use the facilities or whatever else, and he comes back and he puts on the talit, he has to make a new bracha, even if he had in mind that he was going to put it back on, and even if he has his talit katan still on. Bet Yosef, Shulchan Aruch categorically says he makes a bracha. As a matter of fact, I have a friend who grew up in Casablanca. He says, "Yeah, that's how they taught us our whole life. You go into the bathroom, you make a new bracha." I heard in somebody told me in Gibraltar also that's how they taught something similar to this. Now, the Rabbi Rafael Berdugo, one of the great Chachamim of Miknes in the 1800s, writes, "Of course, we follow Maran the Shulchan Aruch over here." Similarly, by somebody whose talit fell, then you don't have anything in mind to put the talit back on. Shulchan Aruch says you have to make a new bracha. If your talit fell, you pick it up. The Kaf HaChaim says Safek brachot leakel, because there's one opinion, not even brought in the Shulchan Aruch, not even brought in the Ramah, Safek brachot leakel. But Maran doesn't say this. Bet Oved, one of the great Sidurim, says to make a bracha. So again, the Sephardic Acharonim over here say you have to make a new bracha if it fell. And indeed, I think some later Sephardic poskim go like this as well. But many others will tell you, no, Safek Brachot Lakel. In Morocco, we followed the rule that we don't say Safek Brachot Lakel against the Shulchan Aruch. And let me tell you the most explicit source. There's a halacha, if you sleep with your talit and you wake up in the morning, you don't make a new bracha, but Maran says to make a bracha. And there was a sefer called the Divrei Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Berdugo, from Miknes as well. And Rabbi Yosef Berdugo says in Shelo Tushuvot Siman Bet, Yesh Lishol, why don't we make a bracha when we go to sleep with the talit? And if you're going to tell me because we say Safek Brachot Le'akel against the Shulchan Aruch, it is known that we don't say Safek Brachot Le'akel against Shulchan Aruch. I was involved recently with the Sephardic Sidur of Art Scroll, and they have over there the bracha for what ladies say in the morning, instead of saying Shelo Asani Isha, right? In LA, it's a complicated how to say that bracha, anyways. But as I'm saying, instead of saying Shelo Asani Isha, women say Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam She'asani Kirtzono. Now, most Sephardic Sidurim that you'll pick up, as well as Sidurim from Edot HaMizrach, they say to say this bracha without the name of Hashem. To say Baruch Ata for women, to say She'asani Kirtzono. Now, how does Moroccan halacha follow here? It's very hard to say what the minhag was. Rabbi Shalom Misas once told me that you can't really decide what's a minhag by ladies. A lot of ladies didn't even know how to read Hebrew, and it was something that wasn't very we'll call controlled or organized to be able to establish a minhag. To establish a minhag is something very important. It has to have bases that the Chachamim wrote about or knew about. It doesn't happen just like that. Just because you saw something in the Bet Knesset, that's a minhag. That's a minhag. You know, there's once a Bet Knesset by Berich Shemeh. Everybody would give their back to the Hechal and say Berich Shemeh. It was a guy came to Bet Knesset. What is this? So he says, that's our minhag. He looked into it. It's because in the previous synagogue they had Berich Shemeh in the back wall, so everybody would turn around and they would say Berich Shemeh. So obviously every minhag that you see, you have to know where it comes from, right? So here, how do we follow? So in the sources in Siman Mem Vav of the Shulchan Aruch, the Tur, their opinion is that women make the bracha of She'asani Kirtzono with the Shem Hashem, Shem U'Malchut. When I was in the city of Fez around 5 years ago, I had connections in one of the synagogues where my grandfather used to pray. Voilà, Sylviane, she's here, Sylviane? No, it's... Oh, no. Where's Esther? Okay, so my cousin, she still lives there. One of the last pioneering Jews still there. So her husband, Alav Shalom, was able to get me 4 or 5 old Sidurim that were in the Bet Knesset. I'm telling you, old Sidurim from the city of Fez that didn't have like a cover at the beginning, and it was at least 100 or 200 years old. It was printed. And all of those Sidurim, it wrote, Baruch Ata Hashem, Elokeinu Melech Haolam She'asani Kirtzono. It didn't take out the name of Hashem. The Tfilat HaChodesh in the earlier editions doesn't take out the name of Hashem. The one who says to take out the name of Hashem is the Chida. Chida, Rav Chaim Yosef David Azulai, although was one of the greatest Hachamim that the Sfaradim ever had, that was not the general Psak Halacha in Morocco, because the Chida focused much more on Minhagei Eretz Yisrael. His father was from Morocco. His mother actually was Ashkenazi, and he visited Morocco. Many places he visited. He's a diary, and he was one of the most prolific Talmidei Chachamim and writers. But in Psak Halacha in Morocco, I'll tell you some of the Sfarim that we followed. We followed Sfarim that explained what's written in the Shulchan Aruch. The Sefer Bet Yehuda Rav Yehuda Ayash, one of the great Algerian rabbis, quoted in the Mishnah Berurah thousands of times. Rabbi Akiva Eiger quotes him. All the great Acharonim quote Rav Yehuda Ayash. learned in the yeshiva in Fez, and then went to Algeria. And that's where he became he was the great rabbi, originally from there. That sefer explains a lot the opinion of Maran Shulchan Aruch. That's a sefer we follow, like the Ma'amar Mordechai, one of the great Turkish Acharonim, also explains the opinion of Maran Shulchan Aruch a lot. That's a sefer that'll be closer to Moroccan Psak. The Bet Oved, more or less, depends where, is a sidur that was used as a lot of Piskei Halachot. That's the, more or less, the gist of how we follow the Moroccan Halacha. So, Safek Brachot Le'akel was written in the later Acharonim by Morocco, like Rabbi Baruch Toledano, Rabbi Shalom Isas sometimes, but the early Kadmonim did not write it as much. And it seems to be that the early Kadmonim adopted that we don't say Safek Brachot Le'akel necessarily. In some cases, you have to ask the rabbi when not. But for the most part, you can't just say, oh, Safek Brachot Le'akel. It's like a card. It's like a get out of jail free card. It doesn't work that way. Shulchan Aruch says to make a bracha when you have a child who was born. So you make a bracha when the child was born. That's how they did it. People were more confident to make a bracha when it was warranted. You have to know when not, but that's more or less the gist of it. So bracha she'asani kirtzono, I insisted with Art Scroll that it should say that for Moroccans we say the bracha. Another Syrian rabbi put up a very big fight against it. It can't be, it's not true, and this. I went back and forth with him. I showed him many sources. I said some sources still today they write yes. Our minhag was that women say the bracha she'asani kirtzono with the name of Hashem. That's even if it's not a minhag necessarily, but that's the logic according to Shulchan Aruch. One of the great Rabbanim that I had a merit to know, his name was Rabbi Elyashiv, Rav Yosef Shalom Elyashiv. By my son over here is named after him. And Rabbi Elyashiv once told me a rule that is very simple. Very simple. If you don't know your minhag, you don't have to go try looking for it. You follow Shulchan Aruch, and that's it. That will simplify things. So we know whatever our minhag, we follow our minhag, which is usually the Shulchan Aruch. And when you don't know, so you say that's our halacha. As a matter of fact, the Moroccan Psak follows Maran Shulchan Aruch probably more than any other Edah in Klal Yisrael. There is a letter in back of my sefer that I wrote 15 different places that Sfaradim, Edot HaMizrach who follow Rav Ovadia Yosef, and all the more so the Ben Ish Chai and others, don't follow Maran, and the Moroccans, we did follow Maran. There are some cases where it's not clear what Maran follows, or some halachot, we had minhagim that are all neged Maran, but that's few. That's few and far apart. That's not the general consensus. So I don't mind. Maybe we can open up for questions if you have any minhag to ask about, and I'll tell you if this is a minhag that I think is a minhag that if I researched it, that is. Otherwise, we have other great rabbanim here. They can help me out. That we have minhagim that have that should be followed. Everything is a source. Everything has to be learned and understood. Not just like you follow minhag just like that, or you don't follow minhag just like that. You have to ask your rabbanim how to conduct yourself. Yeah, and with always tremendous respect towards the previous generations. That you have to understand, and Morocco was blessed with an inordinate amount of chachamim, thousands and thousands of them, that for generations they made sure to filter out what was the proper halacha and to push out what is not the proper halacha. And so we're getting solet nikia, we're getting pure flour, something that is purely sifted. And with what we have nowadays, we understand that is coming out of thousands of years of understanding what's the proper halacha, then it comes with much more respect. Let me give you an example. I'll start off the questions. Let me give you an example. Has anybody ever heard of the minhag of people not to say Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo when you're listening to a bracha that you're being acquitted by? There is such an opinion. You've heard of that before. That Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. Somebody told you, don't say that. You ever heard of that before? Okay. Kiddush. Now, any Moroccan chachamim that I saw growing up, and my parents, everybody else's house, we all answered Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. So either they're wrong, or I come from monkeys. I don't know. You tell me. So let me give you the background. Let me give you the background, just so you understand. This is just a simple halacha. There could be difference of opinions in halacha, but this is how we followed. I just want to show you what we followed is not coming out of the boondocks. Let me explain to you. It's written in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Kuf Chaf Dalid. That's the halachot of Chazarat Hashatz. Right? Notice, Chazarat Hashatz. Al kol beracha u beracha, on any bracha that you hear, you should answer Baruch Hu u Baruch Shemo. The Tur brings this down in the name of his father, the Rosh. And Shulchan Aruch brings it down. Nobody argues on this. Not the Rama, nobody argues. Now, there was a great Chacham in the earlier generations called Rabbi Mesod Rakach. He wrote a sefer on the Rambam, Ma'aser Okech. All the great yeshivot have it, Ma'aser Okech. He writes there in Hilchot Tefillah that why did the Shulchan Aruch write this halacha in Hilchot Chazarat Hashatz? What's the purpose? Why did Chachamim institute Chazarat Hashatz? Why did we institute Chazarat Hashatz? That you acquit somebody who doesn't know. Nowadays, Baruch Hashem, most of us know how to pray, so we don't need the Chazan to acquit us. There's other reasons why we do Chazarat Hashatz, Al Pi Kabbalah, or whatever else, but we really, if I come to Bet Knesset and I don't know how to pray, I'm a new Bal Teshuvah, or I just I'm not sure, so the Chazan acquits me. That case is also written in Siman Kuf Chaf Dalid. Shulchan Aruch was talking about Chazarat Hashatz, where the original takana was to acquit people, and even if you're not being acquitted, you also say Chazarat Hashatz. On that, the Shulchan Aruch says to answer Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. This is a proof that doesn't have any question to it. Raya she'ena lav teshuvah. Shulchan Aruch is bringing this halacha here. That means you unequivocally answer Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo on every single beracha. The one who questioned this was a Chacham called Rabbi Shemuel Abuhab, who was in the time of the Ma'aser Okech. He said, maybe the Rosh was only talking about on brachot that you're not being acquitted. But brachot that you're being acquitted, maybe it's a hefsek. Wasn't sure about it. He says it's a hefsek. Birkei Yosef brings him down, Chida, and he says, but those who answer Baruch Shemo have what to rely on. Ma'aser Okech says more than that. He says, in the Bet Knesset of the Dvar Shemuel, he says, I know the Bet Knesset of the Dvar Shemuel. They didn't even follow his ruling. They kept on answering Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. And he writes 4 reasons that you should answer. Number 1, he says, you're listening to the name of Hashem. How could you not answer Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo? Number 2 is that if you're not going to answer now, you're going to end up never answering even when you should be acquitted. Once Rabbi Shalom Yisas was in Yeshivat Orach Chaim, and they gave him to make a bracha on Brit Milah, on the course of Brit Milah. He said, Baruch Atah Hashem, and nobody answered Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. He got frustrated. He said, well, I'm not acquitting you over here. Even according to you, you should be answering. What happened? He just got really upset. I don't know what happened over there. He was very, like now, nobody answered Baruch Shemo on anything. So it got forgotten. A whole halacha about answering the name of Hashem got forgotten. And so that's the second reason. The third reason, he says, Al Pi Kabbalah, there's important reasons. And fourth reason, I forget. But he writes over there the importance of answering Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. Baba Sali, I said over a story yesterday that Rav Yechiel Abu Chatzera, Shlit from Ramle, when he was a Bachur, he once brought Bachurim over to eat by Basali's house. And the Bachurim didn't answer Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. He looked at them, and he asked them, he says, why didn't you answer? They said, Hefsek. Was always Rosh Yeshiva his whole life. He knew all the Sifrei Halacha, backwards and forwards. So he answered him. He says, my grandfather, Rabbi Yaakov Abich Serah, he didn't know all of what you know, and he still answered Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. I don't want you eating by my table tomorrow. He literally didn't want them. No, because by him, it's an embarrassment to the name of Hashem. When he said the name, when Baba said the name of Hashem, he has Hashem in front of you. The Rav Chaim Vital writes the importance of Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo, how according to Kabbalah, there's all these things. He saw all of this in front of him, so people just not answering, just like, Hifsik. Now what happened? Why Hifsik? Because the Magen Avram says in this regard not to answer on certain brachot, and the Dagul Mirvava, the Noda B'Yehuda, one of the great Ashkenazi Achronim, says, brachot that you're being acquitted by, you shouldn't answer. Mishnah Brura writes this as well. So Rav Ovadia Yosef writes, he knows all these sources, but he says we follow Mishnah Brura. But it's actually, if you don't have a minhag and you want to be machmir like Mishnah Brura, I don't know if that's called being machmir, because you're losing out on answer Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. But okay, if somebody doesn't have a minhag, I understand. The Rav Chaim Palaji was his grandfather was the Chikre Lev, one of the greatest Sephardic Rabbanim from Turkey. He writes, my whole life I grew up on the lap of the Chikre Lev, on my grandfather, and he always answered Baruch Baruch Shemo on every single bracha. The Tunisians, most Sephardic countries, the Persia as well, they all answered Baruch Shemo on every single bracha. That was the universal minhag for generations. And now you see in the sources why. So if somebody wants to come along and say, don't answer, if you want to keep for yourself, you want to say, listen, my parents didn't know what they're talking about, my grandparents, the great Rabbanim didn't know, and I want to be machmir, or I follow one opinion fully and I don't want to be bothered with what happened. Okay, so keep that to yourself. But somebody who follows the traditions that's based on very deep-rooted sources, I don't think you have a right to tell them something. You don't have a right to tell them something like that. That I'm just telling you what these are the sources. You don't have to believe me. You could look them up yourself. So that's another halacha. So any other halacha questions people have? Yes.
So we follow the psak of the Ramah for Adlakat Nerot Shabbat after lighting. When
women light, you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Ramah doesn't. The Ramah talks about it, but the Shulchan Aruch doesn't talk about this. So the Shulchan doesn't talk about it. The Shulchan Aruch says like this. The Rambam writes, when you make a bracha of Adlakat Nerot Shabbat, you make a bracha and then you light. The Shulchan Aruch many times brings the language of the Rambam. Over here he doesn't. He writes an ambiguous language called Kesheyadlik Yevarech. So this is actually an interesting halacha, because the universal custom by Sfaradim and by Ashkenazim, I'm talking about for generations, was that women light and then they make a bracha. Why? Why every bracha we make beforehand? Why would we light and then make a bracha over here? So in halacha, there are different calculations. There are different opinions. So one opinion, called the Bahag, says that when a person makes a bracha, le'adlik ner shel Shabbat, so they're accepting Shabbat. A woman especially, not a man. Man accepts Shabbat in Bet Knesset. So a man, when he lights, could be he should make the bracha before. But a woman, when she is lighting, she is not accepting Shabbat with, she's accepting Shabbat with her bracha and with lighting. So how could she light after she makes a bracha? That's what the Bahag talks about. There's a lot of different, controversies. I'm not going to get into all of the different detailed sources on this, but because of that, we have a original solution. There is a halacha that as long as you're involved in the action, you could still make a bracha. For example, if your mezuzah fell and you put back your mezuzah, you should have made a new bracha, like when your talit fell. What's the halacha if you forgot to make a bracha? Can you still make a bracha on the mezuzah? Some poskim say you could. You know who says you could? Rav Ovadia Yosef says you could. Even though you put up the mezuzah and it's after the action, you could still do it.
You could or you have to?
You have to. You have to. So he says you have to. Others argue that's the truth, but he says you could. You could. Or you should. Okay. So that's after you already did the action. So one of the great students of Rav Ovadia Yosef asked him, why do you say by mezuzah you can make a bracha Adlakat Nerot, you can't? Rav Ovadia didn't want to answer him. Rav Ovadia Yosef knew that the custom was to make a bracha after, but he writes in Yabi Omer Chelek Tet on the bottom, he writes, a gadol ador has the right to change a minhag, and he wanted to change the minhag. That's why he spoke so forcefully about this at one of his favorite subjects, because he wanted to change the custom to follow the Rambam and, in his opinion, the Shulchan Aruch. Others, like Rabbi Tzina Bashal, Rabbi Shalom Misas, debate that that's the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch writes Kish Yadlik Yevarech. So they say that there is a reason why we're doing this custom. There's a reason. And what's the reason? We want to fulfill the opinion of the Bahag. It's not like there's no reason why we're doing this. So it's a halachic question. Do you opt to do the bracha beforehand and you gain over le'asiyatan? Or do you get kind of over le'asiyatan because the woman puts her hands and she's kind of in the same action, and we see in other places like mezuzah it works sometimes, and you gain the bahag? When I was younger and I was more, I had more chutzpah in me, so I had the merit of living right next to Rav Ovadia Yosef, and being that I was very passionate about Moroccan halacha at the time, as a matter of fact, there was 3 instances where Rav Ovadia Yosef told me explicitly, I agree with you, and everyone should follow Moroccan psak. And then I woke up. So that didn't work. Yeah. But I was very busy with it. Even when I went to sleep, I was like, I fantasized on something like that maybe he would agree to me at the end. But I wrote him a letter once about Hadlakat Nerot Shabbat, and I wrote to him that the Aruch HaShulchan writes that in French you say au contraire, opposite, that if you make a bracha first and then you light, then there's a bracha levatala. Because how could you say lehadlik ner shel Shabbat and then light? It looks like a bracha levatala. You're like, well, you're a scammer. You're saying Shabbat and then you light. So Aruch HaShulchan says it's kibracha levatala to do it before. So you're saying it's a bracha levatala afterwards, but to do it beforehand. So I wrote this Aruch HaShulchan in a letter, and I gave it to his chavruta to read to him. Chavruta was a friend of mine, and it didn't go over so well. I said, so what happened? He says, I'll tell you the truth, I read half of the letter, and before I got to it, there was another piece in the letter that I was talking about, Kabbalat Piskei Maran, and his blood pressure went up too high. They had to stop right away. So I didn't get really any answer on that, but I definitely have I'm very passionate about the fact that it's a calculation. Rav Ovadia Yosef, in his tremendous breadth of knowledge and tremendous leadership, that without him, where would the Sfaradim be till today? In tremendous leadership. But Rav Ovadia Yosef also appreciated that there should be a debate in halacha which keeps halacha alive. His best friend was Rabbi Shalom Meses, who was his biggest opponent in halacha, and they loved each other. So there's nothing wrong with saying different opinions as long as it's done in a respectful form. And what Rav Ovadia said, he brought many opinions to change the halacha, but he also recognized that the original custom was by Sephardic and Ashkenazi customs, besides in Taiman and maybe one place in Iraq, that they did the bracha afterwards because they wanted to gain for them throughout the generations. The Chachamim that saw this and wrote about this, like the Chida and the Ben Ish Chai and others, felt that the calculation of following the Bahag supersedes the calculation of Over L'Asiyatan, because there's many answers to Over L'Asiyatan. That's the short answer of it, of a very long subject.
You spoke about Safik Bracha Le'Hafka. So Ashkenazim, in its feeling of the Rosh, they make a bracha and they say Baruch Shem Kivod.
Yeah.
That's Rav Berkovitz from Pesach. That's the question. Why do you do the bracha if you're going to make a Baruch Shem Kivod? It's Safik Bracha Le'Hafka. So he said to me, for a Deoraita, they don't follow Safik Bracha Le'Hafka, but just for a Derabanan they do. So when you were talking about this, are you talking about any halacha Derabanan Deoraita?
Any Deoraita or Derabanan.
So they hold by...
Because we hold a very authoritative psak of the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch by us was the golden rule. And I just wanted to cap it off. Maybe I didn't emphasize this. The reason why we didn't say Savir Chalek against the Shulchan Aruch is the same reason why we follow only Bet Yosef Shulchan Aruch, and why we follow the Ramah whenever the Shulchan doesn't express an opinion. And when somebody else says something later, we don't say Ilu Ayaroeh, because we wanted to give a clear path how to follow halacha, not to mix people up. You say you follow this, and Safik Brachot Lakel this, and then you follow Afkat Ruchel here, and Ilu Raya Maran here. We have Sfarim in front of me, Bet Yosef, Shulchan Aruch, Ramah. Very simple, very easy psak how to go by. They're going to tell me, oh, we don't go after easy. Okay, in Morocco they wanted to make it easy. Nahat ruah. That's it. That way you could go to the beach on Sundays.
One more question.
Yes.
Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach after Hamotzi.
That's complicated.
Yeah, I asked Rabbi Shriki, he said, don't do it. If your father does it, don't say anything.
That's the answer I would give also, and I'll tell you why. I asked this question to Rabbi Shalom Misas and Rav Yeshua Maman. They both told me, and just to clarify the question, there are some, especially from the south of Morocco, that when they say Amotzi lechem min haaretz, they dip the salt 3 times and they say Hashem elech, Hashem elech, Hashem yoch leolam, and then they eat the bread. Now, that's really a bona fide hefsek, because you're not supposed to say anything between the bracha of Amotzi or not. So those in the cities, like the main halachic cities like Fez, Meknes, these places, they didn't hear of this minhag. They didn't do this minhag at all, and hence they were very opposed. Rabbi Yeshua Man, Rabbi Shalom says they told me not that way. There was one Rav called Rabbi Moshe Malka. He was a Dayan in Casablanca, previous generation. Some of you may have known him. And he writes in a Teshuvah to defend this minhag. And Rabbi Michael Peretz from Mexico, he has a whole kuntras on this minhag, to defend this minhag, on Baruch Baruch Shebo. And he says something very logical. He says like this, that there's a set in the Tour brings from Rabbeinu Amram, that by Havdalah, listen to this. You could say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu hamavdil ben kodesh lechol, hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. You finish Havdalah. Now, before you drink, it's written in the Tour, Siman Reish Tzadi Gimel, I think. Look at it over there. You wouldn't believe it. After you say, hamavdil ben kodesh lechol, you have like 3 pages of bakashot, of hashba'ot. Mashbi'ani malach this, simbatohu mazal tov, yiten lecha Hashem, a whole nusach before you drink the wine. What's going on here? And also by the birkat of Gefen, by the brit milah. What a brit Gefen, and then Elokeinu kayim et hayeled hazeh. You're not supposed to. You don't drink the wine. Some say you should taste a little bit, but really in halacha the source is you don't drink the wine. Why is it not a hefsek? So it seems to be like this. This is what Rabbi Peretz suggests, that when something is part and parcel of your nusach, it's not a random thing that's coming. You always say it this way. These Rishonim didn't understand it to be a hefsek. Could be by Hashem Elech is that way also. It's not worse than what Rav Amram Gaon writes. But in truth, if you don't have a minhag, you shouldn't do it. And if you had a minhag, you shouldn't say anything. I think that's an accurate thing. I don't know if there's other rabbis over here that want to weigh in on this. Rabbi Toledano, you have what to say on Hashem Melech?
My grandfather was from Meknes and he did it.
And he did it. Oh boy. Okay, so there you go. And what do you do, Rabbi? You don't do it, huh?
I don't know. You're on camera, so.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's a new concept. It's a new concept. It's a new concept. I know he goes a lot by it. I know he goes. I know where I know, but Rabbi Yosef Berdugo is a bigger man de Amar. He was earlier, and Rabbi Rafael Berdugo is bigger, So we're okay. So I'd love to debate it in sources. But I have a lot of proofs. A lot of proofs. I have a lot of proofs. Okay. Any other questions?
No, on the tenders, some people don't do the complete bracha.
On what?
Thunder.
Oh, thunder. Yeah. So Rabbi Shalom Misas, I asked him once about this, and Rabbi Shalom Misas says that the minhag in Morocco was like the opinion of the Ramban, that you don't say it with Shemu Malchut. But in my Sefer Magen Avot I discussed that the main reason is because you might have missed it. There's different calculations. But if a person really is on time and he could do it, the poskim say you could make the bracha. And Rav Ovadia Yosef also says that nowadays if you hear it and you want to say the bracha, you're allowed to. You're allowed to say the bracha. Yeah.
What about the minhag of saying berachot before kiddush on Shabbat?
Yeah, that's a big. It's interesting. There are some people that they have a few brachot and they don't eat a kezait,
Right.
and some people have a whole meal. Like
I'm not saying the whole meal.
the whole fish for an hour or something like that. So what do you mean?
No, I'm talking about
Either
Mama
one.
saying Borei Peri Ha'etz, Borei Peri Adama, Shakol
It's a wonderful minhag because you get the mea brachot.
Yeah, well, that's
You get mea brachot, and that was the custom. Aperitif. The Shlach Kadosh writes, in order to get a mea brachot, you try to do as many brachot as you can.
So that's okay, but not eating
not in the
not eating more than kazayit.
I read you can eat
It's-
more than kazayit.
Yeah, some people say you can eat more than a kazayit. There are some. If you eat more than a kazayit, and that's your minhag, some say you have what to rely on, that it's considered as part of the meal. It's if you don't have such a custom of eat more than a kazayit, eat less than a kazayit. Pretty hard when you're having salty things before the meal or something to stop, but especially according to Chazon Ish, a kazayit is this small. I don't know what to say. It's a debate. Yeah. Any other minhagim? That's it? Yes. Beautiful example. So Marana Shulchan Aruch writes that we don't say Shem U'Malchut by Noten Layef Koach. That was the original custom, probably in most of Morocco, but Miknes kept it till the end, not to say Noten Layef Koach. So those from Miknes originally didn't say Noten Layef Koach. The rest of Morocco, I didn't get into the whole subject of Kabbalah, but the rest of Morocco transitioned over generations that they do say Noten Layef Koach, which was a lot of Kabbalah Minhagim. It's interesting. Some of them they evolved over time, and at the end we do say Noten Layef Koach, or we do say minhagim alpi Kabbalah. The Arizal, much less about the later sources from the Arizal, and in this particular case, that's what happened. In most cities, they say Noten Layef Koach, and that's what we do. And those who have the original custom that we don't say Shem Malchut, they don't, because they're go according to the opinion of the original Shulchan Aruch opinion.
I was learning a halacha with a Rav, a Moroccan Rav, and we were talking about, and we were learning it from Rav Toledano's Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And he says in that bracha, you don't add Moshe there should be 46 tevot.
Right.
So he's a posek halacha Moroccan, and we have, I think it's the only.
Elokai Neshama, not Elokai Nitzor. Yeah.
Neshama, and then, but in all the Moroccan Sidurim, we have the extra words.
Right, these are nuschaot. Nuschaot is very, very hard to determine what's the proper minhag in a nusach or not, because that was Rabbi Baruch, right? He goes with that Moshel Kol Habriyot a little more, and he felt that this was his original nusach. And there's others who follow Tfilat HaChodesh. They don't go with that. I mean, that's debatable. Nuschaot we're never going to finish. This one has that nusach. It's not really clear how to determine what's a minhag based on a nusach. Very dangerous subject we're getting into on that. All right, Chazaku Baruch Rabotai. Thank you for listening.